Perfect. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Let me see where that is. And we'll do this one. Share it. And let's start with slide number 1. That might actually be a good idea. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and talk about, well, obviously global tales, which is something that we're very excited about. And I'm very happy that today with me is Elena Theodorou. I'm trying to say her name right. I've been trying it for 5 years, Elena, and it's hard. And what I've tried to do is to put in just an hour or like 50 minutes as much information as I can without trying to overload you. So I'm really welcome you to ask any questions that you may have, put them in the chat box. And then if you ever wanted more information or more in-depth information, I'm happy to come back, because this is actually one of those things I love talking about. I'm just trying to find my chat box somewhere. I love talking about, and it's nice to share this work as well, because we can be academics, professors in a university, but if nobody uses what we come up with in our sort of university roles, then it's a pretty boring job. So hopefully I can share some of my enthusiasm. So we are going to talk about personal narratives. Okay, so that's just a brief overview. I need to tell you how this all started. I'm going to tell you why personal narratives and not fictional narratives like stories. We're going to talk about, of course, the Global Tales Protocol. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about analysis, like what are some of the ways that we can look at children's language and analyze it to use in clinical practice. And then I'm going to give you some research updates with clinical implications, and Elena is going to share some of her research as well in that part of the presentation. So, Global Tales, it's all about global connections. Look at our beautiful world map. We are growing. It is an initiative of the Child Language Committee of IOP. And that's also how I met Christina. That's how I met Eleftheria and Elena. And we started back in 2018, and we had 10 different countries on my committee with 8 different languages. And since that time, it's only 6 years ago, we've now got 24 countries, 21 languages, and we've got 45, I say researchers, but they're really people who are interested in child language and personal narratives, and who want to do some investigations into those topics. So at the moment, the protocol is available in 14 different languages. We're counting. We do not have a Romanian version. So I'm hoping one of the things that we might end up with at the end of this hour, if for someone to put up their hand and go, yes, I'll be in on that one. All right. So what is our overall aim as a consortium, we call us, or as a team? We really want to investigate methods for eliciting, so getting language from children, and then for analyzing them, that is suitable for children from different cultures speaking different languages. And why do we want that? Is because from a research perspective, we really want to facilitate cross-cultural and cross-linguistic comparisons. Because we all know what we live in such a changing world, don't we? With people moving across countries, with the majority of the world now speaking more than one language, with refugees changing countries. So as speech pathologists, we work with a lot of kids who speak different languages, and it's hard to keep up, and it's hard to know what can we expect from these children. You know, how can we compare across cultures or across languages without making a judgment like you've got a disorder and you've got a difference, and you know it's important for us for intervention. And then from a clinical perspective, because I'm a clinical speech pathologist, we call them pathologists here, by the way, at heart, you know, we want to have a protocol that would be useful for clinicians around the world so that anyone can pick up and use. So first of all, and hopefully I'm talking to people who all agree with me during this webinar, but why do we actually use language sampling and analysis, right? Why would we elicit a sample from a child and then analyze it? Because it's a lot of work. So first of all, of course, we want to confirm what our standardized test results tell us. Now, I live in a country, we're very lucky. We have a lot of standardized assessments. So we can have a standard score and say, you've got a disorder, your language is normal. But actually, those tests will not always tell us what a child is like in everyday conversations. So the second point is we really want to know what the child's functional language skills are, because as a speech therapist, we want to make sure that we get children who have optimal communication, that they are successful in communication. And our standardized test will not give us those results. And then, of course, if we have our standardized test, if you have them in your country, because I know that not all countries have as many tests as we do, and we know what the child's functional language skills are, then that will assist us in diagnosis. That will tell us whether the child may have a language difference because they speak more than 1 or 2 or 3 languages, or because they have a different cultural upbringing, versus a language disorder, which is a language learning disorder that a child will have for life and which will need a different intervention. So I was part of the Catalyze Consortium. I don't know if you have heard of that. If you're interested, it's an open access article. But really, if you're interested in finding out more about why do we really need to look at functional language skills and the impact of communication difficulties on everyday life, that is a nice paper to refer to. You know, how do we identify language impairments in children? And then, of course, it will help us set detailed goals for intervention, because if we know that the child has a really poor score on a test, that will not tell us what we need to provide intervention for. Anyway, I'm hopefully telling you stuff you already know. So the next question is, why personal narratives, right? Because personal narratives are sort of, it's the sharing of personally experienced events. And they're usually told in the past tense, and they're told in a sequence, and they're told to another person who might be interested in what happened in the other person's life. So personal narratives are all about giving your story meaning. So it's quite different from a fictional narrative that is about a fictional character, someone else or something else that may have had an experience, but it's removed from yourself. And it could actually even be made up. So why personal narratives? Because they develop from a very early age. Children as young as 3 will start to produce those personal narratives. We also know that they are used by children across different cultures and different languages. And that's really important, because not all cultures will actually share fictional stories or will have books in the home to expose children to stories. But we do know that all cultures will share stories with their children. And what you may not know is that the majority of conversations in children between 5 and 11, so in Australia, that's when they are in primary school, are actually involving personal narratives, like the girls talking about what happened in the weekend or what really excites them. So then just a quick slide, there is this critical relationship, right? So if you are better at sharing your personal narratives, it will help your social interactions, and you will have stuff to talk about. So that will help your conversations and will help you tell more stories and share your social interactions. So what we're actually finding is that children who are better at sharing personal narratives, they do better. They have better social emotional well-being. They feel better about themselves. It helps their mental health. It builds friendships. And it's really important, last but not least, for classroom participation, because no doubt in all schools, you know, children have had a weekend and their teacher may say, what did you do on the weekend? Or write down your story about what you did. That's all personal narratives. And then if we think about cultural or linguistic influences, so that's where it gets really interesting. We do know that how much children are exposed to sharing stories with their parents, for example, will really help improve their personal narratives. So, for example, with young children, you may have a 3-year-old and you go and see someone else and you say to your little boy, say he's called Johnny, and you say, Johnny, tell Auntie Marlene, what did we do this morning? And then Johnny says zoo. And then you say, yes, we went to the zoo and we saw the monkeys. So you can see how parents really scaffold children's personal narratives and help them build their stories. However, different cultures do that in different ways. So some cultures will be really talkative and will give their children lots and lots of support. Whereas other children want their children to be cultures, want their children to be very brief. Short stories are better. So we also see differences in structure, right? In my culture and probably in yours too, it's really good sort of that you start, if I ask you, tell me a story about the time you went to the beach, you will tell me that when it was, who went with you, where you went, what happened, and what was the ending, right? That is your typical structure. In some cultures, like Japanese cultures, children may tell you about 10 different times they went to the beach. And you go, oh, that's not normal. Well, actually, in their culture, that could be normal. And then we also know, and that's been amazing about being on the Global Tales team, because language itself is fascinating. The language itself, how people use their language to get meaning across, can be so different across different languages. I'm learning all the time. It's fascinating. How we also have some words in some languages and not others. We found that too. All right, so let's get into why we're all here. So what we set out to do is we wanted to create this standard protocol. And when I say we, this is the IOP Child Language Committee. And we wanted to use verbal prompts only, no pictures, because we all know that, I'll give you an example in Australia. If you live in the outback in Australia, right in the center, the children have never seen a beach. They have no idea what a beach is. So why have a picture of a beach, right? Some children have never seen snow. So why have a picture about snow, for example? We asked children to tell a story. We did not give them a model. We didn't want children to think, I need to use her model. We just say, tell me a story. And they can do whatever they want. And then we use prompts that might be recognizable to children across the globe. So I'll show you in a minute, but they tap into feelings, happy, sad, or emotions. And then what's really important, and it's very tricky, is you need to use neutral subprompts to avoid leading the child. So it's really important that you ask someone, tell me a time you're really happy, and the child says something, and you don't want to say, oh, that is fantastic. We don't do that. We say, oh, tell me more. Or you really try and use all your non-verbals to get this child to keep talking. And then we've only got 6 prompts. We wanted it to be short because as clinicians and researchers, more languages, more transcription takes longer, takes more time. And then we wanted to come up with a standard protocol that we could then translate into different languages, but for meaning, so not word for word. So these are the prompts in English. They're all the same. There is a little bit of a blurb as well, and I'm going to show you where you can download all of these in a minute. The first one is, tell me a story about a time when you felt excited or really happy. But everyone knows what excited or happy is. Tell me a story about a time when you felt worried or confused. Perhaps a time when lots of things were happening and you didn't know what to do. The third one is about a time you were really annoyed or angry. And then tell me a story about a time when you felt proud of yourself. A time about a problem and you had to fix it. And the last one is tell me a story about something that has happened to you that was very important to you. So what you can see, there are some really positive emotions, there's some sort of more negative emotions, and we've got some neutral emotions in here. So the next slide is in Greek, and that was Elena's one. So you can talk to this one, Elena.
Okay, I will just introduce in Greek the prompts. So, πες μου μια ιστορία για κάποια φορά που ένιωσες ενθουσιασμένος ή ευτυχισμένος. Πες μου μια ιστορία για κάποια φορά που ένιωσες προβληματισμένος ή μπερδεμένος. Πες μου μια ιστορία για κάτι που ένιωσες ενοχλημένος ή θυμωμένος. Που ένιωσες περήφανος για τον εαυτό σου, για κάποιο πρόβλημα που έπρεπε να το επιλύσεις, όπου εδώ υπάρχει έτσι μια επιπλέον διευκρίνηση του τι συνέβη και τι έκανες για να το λύσεις, και μια ιστορία για κάτι που συνέβη και ήταν πάρα πολύ σημαντικό. Να πω έτσι στην παρένθεση ότι από την δική μας εμπειρία τόσο στην Ελλάδα όσο και στην Κύπρο, η δεύτερη ερώτηση ήταν μια ερώτηση που μας προβλημάτισε ιδιαίτερα, του πώς πήγαινε το μήνυμα του προβληματισμένος, συμπερδεμένος, αλλά όταν και εσείς έτσι με το καλό εμπλακείτε σε αυτή τη διαδικασία, πιθανότατα το δικό σας feedback θα μας βοηθήσει να διορθώσουμε λίγο το λεκτικό σε αυτή την ερώτηση. Marlene just explained that we faced a little difficulties with the word worry, and I expect from the colleagues here today when they will use the protocol to come back and help us on how to rephrase the wording for this second prompt.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we had a few words like that. Other countries, like proud, was also a concept not all children had heard of. But I think we're navigating that. We're finding ways because there are follow-up prompts.
Yes.
That you will see in the protocols themselves. Anyway, so I'm going to give you an example. This is just a really short clip, so you see how that works. And this is Ava, and you can see some of her responses on the slide here. So I'll just let you listen to her.
Number 3. Okay. Tell me a story about a time when you were really annoyed or angry.
I think it might be like this one time when like I woke up and like I went downstairs for a bit to like have breakfast, and I came back up and I went over to my friend's house, and when I came back I found that my brother and sister had been in my room and like they broke my favorite fan, and like they were playing with lots of my toys. And when I told my mum and dad, they said that it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Well, not it doesn't matter, but they didn't really worry about it too much. And it happened again. One morning I came downstairs and watched a bit of TV, and I went back up and I found my brother jumping on my bed.
Okay.
But yeah, so I felt really annoyed at my...
So basically, she felt very annoyed with her siblings who were playing with her toys and it wasn't allowed. And I'll show you in a minute, we had lots and lots of children who actually did talk about peer problems or being annoyed with peers or family matters. And not all children talk as freely as Ava did, but she definitely got onto the important bits. Sort of they broke my favorite band and were playing with lots of my toys. And mum and dad said it doesn't matter. So she's really trying to get the meaning across that this was important to me. It was very annoying. I love listening to these kids' stories.
Number.
Okay, so just a quick slide to show you that all our protocols, the translations are actually on an OSF, an Open Science Framework site, and you can see lots of our collaborators on this. And if you are interested, all you need to do is you do a Google search and you search on OSF Global Tales, and you will get access to the site straight away. There is also a QR code if you've got your phone handy. But like I said, I'll send through the slides or the recording as well so you can get it. So have a look there. We try and upload research updates and things that we've done. And hopefully you find that helpful. Okay, but let's go into what did we find. So after developing the protocol, we piloted it. That was in 2022. We published that. So it took a while. It was a big, big undertaking. And again, that's a free access paper. So the QR code is there, or you can simply go to that OSF site and download it. So in that first pilot study, we had 248 children from 10 countries speaking 8 different languages. And of course, there was a Greek dialect as well. And that was the Cypriot Greek, wasn't it, Elena? And yeah, you'll talk a bit more about that later. So what we found, we just wanted to see, do the children actually talk? When we give them the prompt, will they give us a language? And that's important because if they don't talk, there's nothing to analyze. And what we found, it was really good to see, is that from, Australia to the US, children would give us across the 6 prompts, sort of, Australia kids talk a lot, obviously, but between sort of, 350 and 700 words. And right throughout, it was successful in eliciting language from children. We had some outliers, those are the little stars up there. And that's normal, whoever does research in spontaneous language, some kids talk a lot and some kids don't talk a lot. And that's just typical variability. In Israel, Arabic-speaking children, they're probably the lowest here, but very different languages. We didn't want to say that's better, that's worse. This is just how it was. And then we looked at the topics. What do kids talk about? Because we're not giving them topics. We just tell us when you were happy or excited. Now, what we were really surprised to see is that most protocol prompts elicited similar topics across countries. Now, I need to tell you that these were typically developing children. They had no history of speech-language difficulties. They were monolingual children, only one language. And they came from households where we would say the parents' income was sort of middle of the road. So they weren't from poor background or weren't from rich backgrounds, just your middle socioeconomic class. And then if you think about excited, 10 of the 11 groups, most of the kids would talk about family events. If you talk about worried, that was actually a prompt where there was more divergence. And I think, as Elena hinted at, that was a tricky concept for some children in some languages. But look at annoyed. Siblings and peers are annoying. Doesn't matter where you live. Proud. Kids talked about personal achievements, academic achievements, and athletics. Problems, again, peer and family relationships. If you're a 10-year-old, you're very likely to talk about peer and family relationships. And then important, again, about personal achievement and family event or supports. So I'm going to talk a bit more about variability between different countries later, because of different cultures, but we were actually very happy to see that there were some remarkable similarities across the different countries. And then we asked researchers, what do you think of the protocol before we take this further? And actually most of them are really positive, really like the focus on personal narratives, so not fictional stories, and felt that the protocol itself could be easily incorporated into existing assessments because it was quick, it didn't take long. And they all felt research was going to be cool to look across different languages and cultures. But translation, again, as Elena said, sometimes it was tricky. because excited is actually, there's no word in Swedish for excited. And I understand that because I have some words in Dutch that you can't translate into English. So then they use different words for that. And that's why I said you have to translate it for rough meaning of what it feels like rather than the exact word. And proud was hard in some languages. And they say, oh, but our kids don't talk about being proud. It's not the right thing to do. And that's interesting because if you had a child in your clinic who doesn't want to talk about proud, maybe it's their cultural background that might actually sort of, make them more hesitant. And then we talked about ethics, because some children talk about things that are can be quite concerning. So we've got to be careful, to have sort of a system in place. If kids talk about something that we really need to report, like how would you do that? Because it's different to asking children just to, talk about a dog in a pond or something. Okay, so let's move on. So since then, we've done lots and lots of work. We've been very busy. And we published this special issue in Folia Phoniatrica that you may have access to, but if you don't, I'm more than happy to send all those papers to the organizers of the webinar, and we're happy to distribute those. So, and what you can see straight away, and I've highlighted them, we've got people from Iceland, Turkey, Ireland. We're going to talk a bit about Cypriot Greek versus Standard Modern Greek, people from Croatia, and then East Asian cultures, India, Arabic, Hebrew, Dutch, and of course, English. So we're starting to really look at different cultures, different languages. But before I go into any of these results, what I want to do is let's look at analysis. So if we are in clinical practice, the first thing people always ask, oh, this is a cool protocol. How do we analyze it? You go, oh, there are so many different ways of doing it that we just need to think about, what do we want to know, right? Because what language skills do children need, or what language skills do they use to tell their story? And what actually makes a good story to start with? What do kids talk about? I still think that's fascinating. And how do children express their emotions or their attitudes, beliefs, and effects? How do they tell us, why did it matter so much? Like Ava, she made it very clear. It was important to me. Listen to me. So I'm going to give you one really little problem story and then show some different ways of analyzing it using this tiny little story. So Katie said, we asked her for a problem story, and she talked about breaking her arm. And she said, when I broke my arm, I did a slide tackle someone. Now, that's a grammatical error in English. I'm not quite sure how that worked. She said, and I came back to school the next day. The person that broke my arm didn't really say sorry. And I had to he was laughing. So I was really annoyed with that. So I had to try to control my anger. And what I had to do to fix it, so they wouldn't say sorry properly. So I had to forgive them, without them saying sorry, which was really annoying because they didn't even say sorry. So I'm just, of course, putting my sort of emphasis onto the different words, but you can see this was a big deal to Katie. Okay, so let's look at what she did. There are multiple ways of analyzing this story. So we could look at microstructure, and you're probably familiar with that term. So we could look at productivity, how many words. We could look at vocabulary, kind of words. We can look at grammar, complexity and accuracy. And I'm going to show you a little bit about evaluation. I really like that one. We can also look at the macrostructure. Is it a well-structured story? And it's like story grammar in fictional stories, right? There's a problem, a plan, a resolution. We can look at coherence. How well does it hang together? And I'm going to talk about that. And then, of course, the topics. What do the kids choose to talk about? And then what you can do is you can say, okay, we can analyze one story, or we can analyze all stories together. So you've got lots of different choices when you're assessing a child. And then it really depends, of course, on your question. So let's go back to that in a minute. So first of all, microstructure. So that is really looking at the linguistics of the story. So we can look at how long is the narrative, you know, how many utterances or C units, how many words, how semantically diverse. So that basically means how many different words can this child use? Or how complex is it from a grammar point of view? And then we could look at the mean length of utterance in words, or we could look at how many complex sentences are there, or how grammatically accurate is it? Because we know that children with developmental language disorder may have real difficulties with accuracy. So they're a bit boring, these measures, but if we look at Katie's problem story, she had 7 utterances, 77 words, 46 different words, mean length of utterance of 11, so that's long. She had 3 utterances that contained dependent clauses, so they were the underlined ones in my previous slide. And then her accuracy was 86%. So basically then, if we do not have norms of what we would expect for a child like Katie, then we could use that for progress monitoring. We could also have another child the same age and compare, if we're worried about a language disorder, compare it to a child the same age. Or we could describe the child's errors or look at the syntactic complexity to see, is there any way that we can improve the complexity of the child's grammar, or are there any errors that are really affecting the child's story? So that is just probably something that you might all do already, that we can also do with personal narratives. And even with one short personal narrative, we get a lot of information. So then let's look at evaluation. Now don't worry too much. I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to give you on the next slide a QR code where you can download examples of these in our coding scheme that we used for a paper that we've published. But what these all do, and we didn't make them up, they're from Peterson and McCabe. We've sort of adapted it and made it shorter, the list. But what all these words help a child do is to get their meaning across, how important it was to them. So we have like compulsion words, like I had to do it, repetition, she went on and on and on, for example. Intentions or desires, I want to do it. And then we have some judgments. We have intensifiers, he was really, really nice to me. Negatives, don't do that. Mental states, you probably all know what those are. And causal explanations are really important, telling people why you felt a certain way or why something happened. And then we've got emotional states that I'm sure you're all aware of, happy and sad. And then we've got some words that are beautiful evaluative words. So let me go back to Katie and show you some examples. So I've highlighted these here. The person that broke my arm didn't really say sorry. And by saying didn't, it gives it a really different meaning. If she just said, the person that broke my arm walked away, that's very different to say didn't say sorry, like that was important. And then it intensifies by saying really, didn't really say sorry, like, are you listening to me? And I had to, and then the child doesn't finish this utterance. And so that's an explanation. I was really annoyed in a motive term with that. So I had to, compulsion, try, intent, to control my anger. And control is a really quite a nice word, isn't it? It in itself tells you controlling my anger is so important. So this is not meant to be a complete tutorial. I just want to show you how you might actually use some of these coding schemes in clinical practice if you're interested in sort of looking at linguistic ways of getting a meaning across. And that's QR code, and I will give you a reference list as well. And it's on our OSF page. That's where you can find the coding scheme itself. Okay, So let's move on to the next one. I hope I'm not going way too fast. So the next one is story grammar. So we could actually look at just, does the child include characters? Is there a setting? Is there a problem? What was the child's response to the problem? Was there a plan to fix the problem? Were there any actions that are to do with the plan? And what was the consequence in the conclusion? And one that you could use is monitoring indices of scholarly language, and that's by Ron Gillum and Sandy Gillum. Again, there's a QR code there that'll be on the recording as well that you can just download for free. I like having things you can download for free. So if we look at Katie, what we could say is, okay, Katie's problem story, we can give her a scoring of 0, it's not there. 1, it's minimal. 2, it seems all right. And 3 is where it's elaborated or complex. So it's quite subjective, but that's okay. We can use it for progress monitoring or get a sense of what children include. And I know that Eleanor has actually done some work on this with global tales narratives as well. So for example, in Katie's problem story, she talks about someone, but that someone's never named. And then she talks about setting when I came to school the next day. So a little bit about time, a little bit about school. Then she said the person that broke my arm didn't really say sorry. So here we've got that initiating event. And she tells us I was really annoyed with that. So she's got a lovely internal response. The plan was I had to try to control my anger. And then she's got a couple of actions. No consequence, but the closure was I was really annoyed. So again, it's a different way of looking at the child's tiny little story that you could use in clinical practice to sort of get a sense of how well structured the story is. Okay, I'm moving on. Let me know if it's too fast, or we'll go back at the end if it's too fast. The next way of looking at it would be narrative coherence. So coherence really tells us how well does a story hang together. And it's interesting because as speech therapists, what we often do is we listen to a child tell a story and you just know it's not quite right, or it's not quite what you'd expect, but it's really hard to score it and to understand what's going on. And this may just be another way of looking at whether it's logical, well-structured, and understandable. And Elaine Rees, it's a lovely paper, and I've got the reference, came up with this scoring scheme. So she says there are 3 things that are important. The first one is context. Is there time and location? Then there's chronology. Is it a list of actions that are in a logical, chronological order? And then the most important is the theme. Is it actually on topic? Does the child develop the topic? And does the child include those causal linkages and elaborations? So this is one where we have just submitted one paper on it. Mateja did from Croatia. And we've got some other evidence of that in some of the other papers. I'm not going to go into more detail, but I just wanted to put it up there because I haven't come across it very often in clinical practice, but it's not a very difficult scoring system to use. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, now that we've sort of got some idea of how we could analyze these different samples, I'm going to show you some of the research evidence for how those scoring schemes might work in clinical populations or in typical populations. So this is the editorial to the special issue that I showed you earlier. And what we did is in the editorial, we're sort of summarizing the 10 articles. Again, this editorial is free access. They've been very kind to us and made that free access. So you could read up more on that. And we've got lots of papers in there. So that just looks like a cool slide. I'm not going to read it out. Okay. So something that's not quite related to analysis is the use of tele-assessment. And that's important, of course. I think after the COVID pandemic, we've all sort of moved more towards tele-assessment. And one of the things we always want to know is, oh, can we use this in tele-assessment? So we were very lucky that our colleagues in Israel, Sarah Furman and Chalub Kavar, actually looked at comparing face-to-face to Zoom or Teams. And they also, what they did is they had Hebrew-speaking children and they had Arabic-speaking children, and they worked together to do this project. And what they found, and I'm most interested here in comparing telehealth versus face-to-face, is that there were some differences, but more for the Arabic-speaking children who produced more utterances face-to-face. So children seemed more talkative if it was in a face-to-face situation as opposed to a screen. And also what is really interesting is that children talked about different topics face-to-face. So when it was face-to-face, they were happier to talk about personal dilemmas, so things that were problems to them, compared to telehealth. When it was telehealth, they talked more about neutral issues like family events or things that were sort of not as maybe emotionally charged to them. So I just want you to be aware of that. And maybe what we need to do, but that needs further research perhaps, is make sure that kids really feel at ease when you do telehealth assessments. Perhaps it needs a longer warm-up. But also we've got to be careful just to be aware that kids maybe won't talk as much, or maybe they do need to get more familiar with it. Chalub, so she's Arabic speaking. She also said that a lot of the Arabic speaking children were from slightly lower socioeconomic areas and were not as used to using technology. So again, keep that in mind, because that could actually mean that the kids are so sort of perhaps mesmerized by the technology that they don't talk as much initially. We just don't know that. But overall, the results look pretty promising, because there weren't major differences on many of the measures. So then the team in Croatia, Jelena and Mateja and Anna, they looked at, okay, so if we ask kids to talk about the global tales topics, does it improve with age? And that's important, because of course, if we want to have a good language measure, you would expect kids to get better with age. And guess what? They found that between 7 to 13 years of age, children gradually produce more utterances, more words, they use more different words, and they use more complex sentences. So that's, again, is really good initial evidence that this might just be a protocol that does a really good job. And then, of course, what we want to know is, does the protocol help us identify language difficulties or disorders from typical language development? And we've got a couple of studies now where people have looked at that. The first one is by our team from Belgium, Crystal van Vrecken, and they looked at adolescents with and without dyslexia. So they had a reading disorder. And what they found is that those children with dyslexia had much lower number of different words when they talked about the global tales compared to their peers without dyslexia. And they also hypothesized that because these children, of course, they have real difficulty reading, decoding. So they have less exposure to written material, which then really influences their spoken language. And you can even see that in personal narratives that we use on a daily basis. And then this is just submitted for publication. So this is Mateja Gabay, who works with me as a PhD student. She's Croatian. I've learned a little bit of Croatian, not much. It's hard. She had 50 children with developmental language disorder, 10-year-olds, and 50 children who did not have developmental language disorder. And what she found is that there were significant group differences on mean length of utterance and on grammatical accuracy, and also on that measure of coherence that I talked about earlier by Rees and her colleagues. So the children with DLD were less able to chronologically sequence their personal narrative, and they found it much harder to stay on topic and to really explain why and to elaborate on it. I can't share that with you yet. We're just waiting for the reviewers, so fingers crossed. And then a really lovely study is by Carol Westby and colleagues from different Asian countries. So we've got Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. And they wanted to see whether children have different topics. Do they talk about different topics in response to the global tales? And what they actually found is that even though they talked about similar topics, the frequencies of these topics within their stories varied. So again, I don't have time to really go into detail. You'd have to ask Carol. She can talk for hours on this. But again, I think keep that in mind. If you have children who are from Asian countries, then they might actually share their stories in a different way, because it's a very different, it's a different culture, obviously. And then Vasu from India did a lovely little study with children in India. What do they talk about? And she definitely found some cultural influences in the topics of Hindi-speaking children, where those children actually talked about feeling proud when they helped an elder cross the road. And I have heard none of the Australian children ever talk about helping elderly people. So it's fascinating how you just listen to stories. Again, happy to share these 4 articles with you. I'm going to hand over to Eleanor for the next few minutes, because she's going to talk about non-mainstream dialect. So I put this one up first, Eleanor. I know you didn't, and then I'll turn to the next one. So you
Thank you so much, Marlene, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present briefly the study that we conducted in Cyprus and in Greece using the Global Tales Protocol. Firstly, I would like to explain a little bit of the linguistic situation in Cyprus, especially for the colleagues from Romania. In Cyprus, the linguistic situation has been characterized as diglossia. The official language is Standard Modern Greek, and the local variety is the Cypriot Greek dialect. The Cypriot Greek differs in all linguistic levels from the official Greek language. And our study examined whether there are differences between children who are Cypriot Greek speakers and those who are speakers of the standard variety of the Standard Modern Greek. Next slide, please. So the influence of dialect on narrative performance has been investigated in the English-speaking population. For example, Price and colleagues examined the fictional narratives of African-American children speaking in both standard formal English and dialect. They found that African-American children exhibited macrostructural completeness in their fictional narratives during a retelling task. Other researchers studied the relationship between the use of African-American English by preschoolers and their language and literacy skills. They showed that using dialectal features in a fictional narrative task was associated with stronger early literacy skills, highlighting the importance of dialect awareness. And Mills and her colleagues concluded that analyzing the macrostructure and microstructure of narratives can describe the narrative abilities of dialectal speakers for whom there are few culturally appropriate analysis methods available, and this is the case for Cyprus as well. So our aims were were to see how do Cypriot Greek and Standard Modern Greek speaking children perform on the Global Tales assessment regarding story structure, to investigate whether there are differences in personal story narration between these two groups of children, to examine how do Greek, Cypriot and Greek children perform on the Global Tales prompts regarding semantic diversity and syntactic complexity, and to see whether there are differences in semantic diversity and syntactic complexity between Cypriot Greek and Standard Modern Greek speakers in their responses to the protocol's prompts. And I have some of the results here. The analysis showed that children from both groups showed a similar performance on measures of macrostructure, except for the happy prompt, a narrative task that requires the child to tell a happy story, where Cypriot Greek speakers outperform Standard Modern Greek speakers. We do not really know why. This similarity was observed regardless of the children's language background. At the microstructure level, which involves analyzing the specific words and grammatical structures used in the narrative, Cypriot speakers displayed similar overall productivity and semantic diversity to Standard Modern Greek speakers. But they had a significantly lower mean length of utterance. Based on these findings, we strongly recommend that speech and language therapists should refrain from assessing the syntactic ability of the Cypriot Greek speakers using the standard variety of Greek. This is a crucial point to know, as it's important to raise awareness among therapists, among clinicians about linguistic diversity in order to prevent confusion between language differences and language disorders, as already Marlene said earlier. Thank you so much, Marlene.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's very clear. Yeah, and there's so many languages, of course, where we have dialects, and again, really need to appreciate it for what it is. Yeah. So take-home messages. We're doing really well on time, because then we can have a bit of a discussion if people want. But really, what we found so far is that we're happy. You know, it's useful in gathering meaningful samples from children from a wide range of cultures, speaking a wide range of languages, and we've just given you some of the published results. But so far, you know, we're collecting. Well, I should not say we, but the team from Danish children. It's really fascinating. We're also collecting data from autistic children at the moment to see how they structure their stories. So we've got quite a few PhD students, which is absolutely fantastic. So we've got a next generation of really keen people coming and joining us. When you're translating the protocol, then really try to maintain the essence of the prompt and be very careful. So what we do, and I could have put that on a slide, if we say, if the child doesn't say anything, then we say, okay, some children tell me about a time that they did this or did that. So that is a little bit more of a specific prompt, and the children will, of course, rely on that, and they may pick one of those. So we've got to be very careful not to give the children too specific follow-up prompts, because we are then already leading them. But why we've done that is because we don't want kids to say nothing, because then there's nothing to analyze. So analysis can focus on so many different things. So hopefully you'll take that away from tonight's, or for me tonight, webinar. But, you know, productivity, grammar, semantics, coherence, and structure. And what I suggest is you don't have to do all of it. You know, what you could do is you could say, okay, if I'm really concerned about the child's grammar, why not use that to have a real functional little bit of language output, and I'll look at the child's grammar in detail. But if you're worried in sort of the coherence, so that is that coding scheme of context, chronology, and theme. Our preliminary analyses of autistic children that we've assessed is actually they really struggle in coherence and in topic maintenance. Then I probably wouldn't worry about productivity or doing an analysis on grammar, because really just focus on coherence. And then evaluation of topics is important, because not only does it tell us what's different between cultures, but it will tell us what is important to the children that we work with. And it may really inform our clinical approach. You know, what do kids want to talk about? And if we can work on that in clinical practice, then that might be something that they can then take away and use outside of your clinic or outside of the school, in the community with their friends, to really help them build friendships. So yeah, that's how I see that one. So that's all I prepared for my 1 hour, 56 minutes. I've put some key references here, but seriously, feel free to visit either the OSF page. I've also got a personal web site. It's just my whole name.com. There's no financial interest in that whatsoever. And if there are any questions, there are a few on there, Elena, you'll have to help me out with that. Then I'm more than happy to answer those. So I might stop sharing that here, because I'm aware that this might be lunchtime for some people who may need to go.
Thank you very much, Marlene. It is a great tool, this protocol. I really appreciate it, and your presentation and everything you share with us today. What about your presentation? Can it be shared with the participants? People from our association ask for your presentation. If you can make it available, if you can send it through my email, and I will share with our association members. And we usually do this. We have form collecting the presence. I did not spoke with Christina about this, but maybe this is not a bad idea for you for the Greek part. We make the presence with we want to see which are the persons that attended this webinar. Persons usually ask us for certificate of attendance, and this is a very easy way of making the certificates of attendance. And we also can share with Marlene the feedback for the webinar if you want this part from those that fill in the form.
As long as they're nice to me, that's fine.
I'm sure that they will be.
And I mean, if it's in Romanian or Greek, I can't read it. I'll use Google Translate.
Because your effort have to be recompensated at least in this way. It's not a small thing to have somebody sharing his experience and his research and his scientific work just for that, because he wants to share. So it's not